Released for PC on February the 10th, 2017 with Chapter 2 releasing on April 27th, we have Bendy and the Ink Machine. Now keep in mind I'm only going to cover what's available at the time of this review, which is only Chapters 1 and 2, thus this review will lack a rating. A full review will be released after the 5th and final chapter comes out. The game was developed and published by the Meatly Games on the Unity engine. As a heads up, there will be some minor spoilers in this review, so if you're not too keen on being spoiled, feel free to jump down to The Opinion, where I'll reiterate the good and the bad points of the game. In this game you play as Henry, an old employee of Joey Drew Studios. After receiving an invitation from Joey 30 years later to visit the old workshop, there's something I need to show you, Henry enters the now rundown studio and upon finding the ink machine, discovers that there may be more to the studio than meets the eye. The game is a puzzle game with horror elements and is presented in a sepia tone to represent the older days of animation. But is the game any good? Find out in The Good. Atmosphere and presentation are the standout features of this game. The vintage cartoonish art style, sepia tone, and the fact things aren't what they appear to be can be quite unsettling at times. The use of the Bendy cutout in the first chapter is a good example of this and acts as a foreshadowing of sorts of things to come. The second chapter introduces survival horror elements and allows Henry to be able to defend himself against the enemies that attack him. The Bendy cutouts make a return and can be destroyed by the axe, however some of them have the ability to reform if Henry looks away from them and then looks back, heavily reinforcing suggestions that supernatural forces are at work here. There's also Bendy, who will appear to frighten the player or in the second chapter's case, chase them. There's more subtle moments to disturb the player and a lot of them you'll tend to miss if you're not looking or paying attention. The presentation and atmosphere in this game I think has been executed very well, and easily the best thing this game has to offer. The game's story and lore, while initially simple enough with Henry visiting the studios he used to work at 30 years ago, has some subtle hints in the form of voice recordings the player can listen to in the game. These voice recordings give Henry hints about what's been going on at the studios, and some of the more eccentric and disturbing activities some of the employees have been getting up to. This is clearly reinforced once more in the second chapter regarding a particular individual. The voice recordings in Chapter 2 also play a key part to the puzzles of the chapter, one funny enough being finding keys, and another being instruments to play for another puzzle. There's even some hidden secrets in the game, although you'd have to search every nook and cranny to find those too. The game also has some random aspects to it, making each playthrough slightly different in terms of finding things. In Chapter 1, Henry is required to find 6 items in order to get the ink machine started, and all 6 items are in different places each playthrough. Early on in Chapter 2, Henry needs to flick 3 switches to open a gate, with the switches being in random places. Later on, when finding the keys I mentioned earlier, they'll be, you guessed it, in different places each time. The voice recording on which instruments to play for a puzzle also changes, making the instruments and the order in which to play them in different. It's a nice refreshing touch to the game, admittedly, and makes it so that you can't memorize the location of items or instruments to play. However, there's 2 sides to the coin here, and we're about to get to the other side in The Bad. The issues I have with this game right now are more minor than anything. While I appreciate the game for having the first chapter available for free, the game is a little on the short side. While I don't personally have a problem paying for the additional chapters, I can understand why people have a problem overpaying money for a chapter that can be completed in 20 to 30 minutes, or even less if you know what you're doing. Another minor issue I have is with the game's options. For some reason, every time I start up a new game, start at Chapter 2, or progress from Chapter 1 to Chapter 2, the game likes to switch depth of field back on, regardless of the fact that when I enter my settings, the feature is clearly switched off. It's not a huge problem, but it does get a little annoying having to open my settings just so I can turn the forced depth of field off. Aside from that, that's all I really have to complain about, so let's present some ideas. Introduce a single cost for all 5 chapters. Now I presume that will happen after the 5th chapter is released, but I think an option where you pay once for the whole game instead of treating each chapter as DLC is a better approach to the formula. For people unsure about the game, then sure, episodic purchases are a good idea, but I like to pay one price and get it over and done with. Longer content with branching paths. This is something I'd like to see. So far in the game it's moved from A to B and then to C. Maybe in a future chapter have Henry deal with multiple things with the choice of choosing whether to do B or C first. As a bonus, maybe add benefits or consequences based on the order he tackled those objectives. This will certainly make the chapters a little longer and address the concerns of people saying that $5.99 US dollars, or in my case $7.99 New Zealand dollars, is a bit steep for short content, while making the story a little longer and a little better. With that out of the way, it's time I give the opinion. To summarise, at the moment, Bendy and the Ink Machine has been a reasonably enjoyable experience. The game's best aspects are its atmosphere and visual presentation, with the game's story, lore and randomisation aspects playing a more minor role to it. However, the only gripes, as minor as they are, just happen to be the game's current overall length, and a setting that keeps turning itself on. With Chapter 3 at the time of this review in development, I would certainly like to see where the visual presentation and story goes. The plot sort of reminds me of those creepypasta stories about Disney cartoons, so following that trend, I'm not expecting things to go well for Henry, but we'll have to wait and see. It's been pretty good so far, so here's hoping the Meat League keeps it up. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the full review in the future once the game is complete, and the next Infinite Backlog review. If you enjoyed today's review, feel free to check out some of our other videos and subscribe for more. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram and our Facebook page. Once again, thank you for watching.